But each of the law firms does a check when they get somebody who calls and says, would you represent me? They do a check to see if they have represented anybody else that would be a conflict, which means if I represent somebody in a divorce today and his wife comes back 6-8 months later and wants to modify child support, can I represent that person? No, I can't. So they do a check automatically in a law firm. Everybody who practices does, so that there's no allegation of conflict of interest and you have to go through a hearing and you have to do all that. They do that way up front. Conflict with public interest, safekeeping of property. You can go down through this if you have any real strong difficulty sleeping some night and you want something to do. There's just a lot of rules and a lot of regulations. But the key issues are what we call in the law profession zealous representation of your client. So when that attorney gets up and you've got a mom who has neglected her kids, who has not maybe even abused her kids, and the attorney for her gets up and begins to talk and begins to represent her interests and give all the reasons why her rights shouldn't be terminated, etc. That's because he represents her interests. There are other people in that courtroom that are supposed to be representing the interest of the children, of the father, all of the other parties to that case. So consequently, it sounds like, doesn't he have a conscience? And you can say to yourself, he has to do that in order to continue to be licensed as an attorney. That's his job. One of the difficulties in these issues are why an attorney would be disciplined. Communication is a big one. Communication is very difficult. How many times have you tried to call an attorney in their office and gotten a reply? Clients deserve, zero, I see a zero. Clients deserve to know what their case, what is happening with their case, where it stands. They deserve to know what's going on. They're paying that person to represent them. And one of the big disciplines or one of the big complaints that come through the Bar Association are that the attorney never returned my calls, the attorney never responded to me, and I had questions. Not returning the client documents. I to this day can't figure out why you'd keep them. I mean, we had boxes of documents. Why in the world would you want someone else's? Typically what it is, it's a negotiation because somebody owes you money. And so if you owe money on your case, the attorney will say, I'll turn over your documents when you give me the money. Not a good idea. Incompetence. A lot of times you'll see on appeal ineffective assistance of counsel. Criminal appeals. When I was doing criminal appeal work, I used to argue that all the time. He didn't do what he was supposed to do. Conflicts of interest, yeah. You have to, like we talked about a few minutes ago, you've got to separate your clients, you've got to know who your clients are. You can't have a conflict and represent somebody when you know secrets from the other side. So that goes to the confidentiality. Financial matters, that's a biggie. When you are practicing law, you're obligated to keep a separate account for your client's funds. I had a classmate in my law school class who we thought had bought the golden egg. He had a father who had a law firm. So instead of going out and doing the grunt work and everything that we had to do to set up practices and get going, he walked out of law school right into his dad's firm. The firm was a very wealthy firm because they represented estates for very wealthy people. So his dad turns over some cases to him, and every time I ran into a classmate, they would say to me, boy, he's really doing well. You know, he's got this big house, he's got this big car, he's got married a judge's daughter. You know, he was really at the top of his game. Turns out he was siphoning money out of the estate accounts. Almost got his father disbarred. He got disbarred, he got a divorce, and he ended up in jail because he had siphoned off the money. So it's a big deal. Every year you have to report to the Supreme Court what's in your IOTA account. And that IOTA account is the accounts that you have for the clients. So if you take some kind of a retainer and you put it in an account, then you have to account for the money you take out of that account. So many hours of work, that's legitimate, but you have to have that documentation so that the Supreme Court can say you did what you were supposed to do and you didn't violate anything. So we're going to talk about discipline. Who watches over the attorneys? Just like the judicial system, there is a board, and there's a disciplinary board, and there's Texas rules of disciplinary procedure. And each state has one that determines the ethics, and it's an arm of the Supreme Court. They interpret the rules, they interpret violations, and they're the ones that issue whatever discipline they feel meets the crime, if there is a crime. Because again, anybody can report an attorney. The funniest one I heard was that a woman reported her husband's attorney. And the advisory board said, wait. He didn't represent you. You can't have a complaint against him. You can have a complaint against your own attorney, but you can't have a complaint against the guy that represents your husband. So there is some kind of limit. But depending on the offense, they can issue a letter of reprimand. And that letter of reprimand basically says you did this, this, and this, and that was not good. So don't do it again. And it only goes to the attorney, so there's no public awareness. It's not published. Then they can issue a public reprimand, which basically goes on the internet and goes to anybody who wants to look. And basically that is just a reprimand, but it goes public. They can also suspend an attorney, and depending on what the offense is, the suspension can be 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years. It can be as long as the commission determines is fair for what occurred. I worked for an attorney who, he was kind of, well, he was older. I can say that because I'm old now. But he did a stupid thing, and it didn't harm anybody. He was in control of his aunt's Social Security money. And so when her Social Security check came in, it just went to an account. She had enough money and he could pay the bills and he could take care of her and everything was fine. Well, she died. And instead of calling Social Security, the check just kept going in the account and in the account. And probably 6 months later, Social Security contacted him and said, "This woman's dead." Well, he went to the account and sure enough, the money was all there. He hadn't touched it. And so he said to the commission, because they filed a complaint against him and said he was misusing funds, etc. We argued for at least a month that there was no harm done, there was nothing, and they suspended that lawyer for 6 months because he did not attend to finances and he was negligent. And basically what it was is, to be quite honest, he was starting his own business and he was out selling antiques. And so instead of attending to what he needed to attend to, so he got suspended. So that was really kind of depressing. He was kind of my mentor at the law firm. He was a really, really quality person. And to have that happen, he never went back to practice law. He left the practice of law and did his antique business and became wealthy, selling antiques. So he did okay, but that's kind of discouraging. And then, of course, they can disbar, like they did my classmate who stole all the money. And if you get disbarred, that's it. No other state will take you. You are disbarred. And then they can order you to pay restitution. And I'm sure in the case of the lawyer who stole the money, he had to pay it back. So it's kind of hard when you're in jail, and you'll probably be paying it back the rest of your life. But, we teach our kids there are consequences to everything you do in life. So he had to suffer the consequences. So I put together some kind of guidelines for judicial advocacy, and we'll go through them. and one at a time, and I'm open to comment. Developing comfort, knowing the judge and the rules goes to what we talked about. Go ahead.
Going
Gigi.
back to the attorneys and who's represented, have we ever figured out why foster parents don't get assigned
Why foster parents don't get assigned?
attorney?
They're not a party. What can you do to a foster parent? There's no action against a foster parent. The foster parents are all licensed through the department. And so the only people that would be parties would be mom, dad, grandparents, if they intervene. So that's why they don't get assigned an attorney. And I was just on the receiving end of that. One of my cases that was waiting on appeal to be just transferring PMC blew up, and the foster mom, who was a kinship mom actually, wanted to be a party, and the judge said to her, I can't speak to you. You're not a party to this action. Now, she could have gone and intervened and filed an intervention, which means she applies to the court to be considered a party because she had had the child since he was 5 months old. And so she could have intervened and become a party, and then the judge would have had to appoint her an attorney if she couldn't afford it, etc. But she opted not to do that.
Good to know, though.
Yeah. You can always intervene. Doesn't mean the judge is going to grant it, but remember that evidence is necessary. The report versus knowledge. And I can't say that enough. The judge probably is not going to have time to sit down and read a report like you would like it read, underlined and highlighted, and, you know, these are the important things. Also, I couldn't tell you all of the facts of my cases at the end of the week after hearing 36 cases. There's just no way. There's no physical way for a judge to know all of the details that you know and all of the things that you think are critical in the recommendation you made. And so what I try to do before I go to court is I make bullets. These are the things I want to be sure that the judge is hearing. You have to wait till it's your turn to talk, but you've got them narrowed down, because the other thing the judges don't like is somebody getting up there and starting to ramble. You know, well, I think this or I think this. You got to have bullets. You got to have points, and you got to have verifiable points. Whatever you do in your cases, don't assume that because the caseworker told you something, that that's the fact. I verify every fact that I take to court, because they have cases, they have numbers of cases, and sometimes they get confused. We had a horrible situation. My husband's here in the audience, by the way. My son was with a group of guys, and they were going south down to Corpus Christi for the weekend. And so as, you know, he was 19, they were 18. Yeah, he was 19. And they're stopping and getting their beer for the weekend. And the driver of the truck, he decides he's going to pop one early, so he's jugging a beer. Up comes the police in a small town, stops him. Before he stops the truck, he pitches the beer can out the window. Talk about stupid kids. So anyway, they get him out of the truck, and they confiscate their beer, and they charge them with underage drinking, and they charge him with contributing. Now my son, he always says he was raised by me, so he knows his legal rights. So the next day, they let the two out because they say, yeah, we're guilty, we're guilty, we're guilty. He said, I didn't buy the beer for them. I didn't give them the beer. I am not pleading to something I didn't do. And I'm thinking, well, I don't know any of this, because of course, at 18 and 19, they're not calling mom when they get in jail, okay? So he's sitting in jail, so the two of them come home and get their parents involved, and they get the money together and they bail him out, okay? So they get him in, they get him home, and we wait and we wait and we wait for him to be set for trial or hearing, whatever. So I call an attorney down in that area, and I say, they didn't read him their rights. They took him, they got him out of the truck, they took the beer, They didn't read them their rights, so just go in and have it dismissed. And he says to me, "Are you kidding me?" I said, "No." He said, "There's no civil rights down here." He said, "They'll do anything they want to do." So the case comes up. I get a call from the prosecutor, and the prosecutor says, "We're charging him with possession of a narcotic, and it's a felony charge." And I said, "What?" So me in my interrogation mode, I get all of these guys together, and I say, "Okay, come clean. What in the heck was in that truck?" We have a horrible night going over and over and over. They keep denying. All we had was beer, really, it was all. I get a call from the prosecutor the next day, and he says to me, "I am really sorry, but I got my cases mixed up." And he said, "When your son got hauled in with his friends, we hauled in 3 other ones who were in possession of narcotics. So I'm just going to drop the charges." And I thought, yeah, fine. I could have had the big one.
I know.
So, you know, just one of those things, especially when you're raising kids. The other thing that I will tell you, when I was in Ohio, we always prepared for trial. We had trial prep, and they don't do that here. My first trial in Harris County, I say to the supervisor, "Well, when are they going to call us to prepare for our testimony?" It was a termination hearing, and it was going to be ugly. And she said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, aren't they going to prepare us so they know what we're going to say?" And she said, "No, they don't do that." They don't do it in Walker County either. I have yet to be called by a prosecutor to tell them what I'm going to say. The closest it comes is in the courtroom, and you've all experienced this. You kind of huddle, and everybody says, "Yeah, that's what we agreed to, and that's what we're going to do." But I would suggest that you prepare yourself. You prepare. You know what the department is going to be asking for. You know what it takes to get there, and make sure in your testimony that you put it in. Just be prepared, because they're not going to prepare you, but you can prepare yourself. Again, don't assume, verify your facts. And then when you take the stand or when you're in the hearing, and I know it's difficult because you're all in this horseshoe and everybody's kind of juggling and trying to decide who's going to say what and where and whatever, but speak up. You know, be respectful to the court and know what the decorum is. And if there's any way that they ask, just wait your turn. But if you're standing there and they're getting ready to close that hearing, you speak up. And all you have to do is say, "Your Honor, can I tell you something that I don't think you know, or that you may not know about, that I found out about?" And most generally, they're very receptive. Do it, like I said, with respect, but don't leave there wondering if that judge read that report and if they've got that fact, because there's a good chance they don't. And then the one thing that I've always done, this has been since I started working, and primarily I've always worked with people or with kids or done service work. And the one thing I do is, when we lived in Ohio, I had a long drive, and I used that drive time to kind of decompress. And I talked to my sister about this, so it has to be something we were raised with. I think it's guilt. Yeah, I think it's guilt. But anyway, I go over and I decompress, and I would go through the day and my interactions with people. And when I started having people work for me, I always went over and thought, did I handle that problem right? Is there something I could have done better? Is there some way I could have done it differently? And a lot of times I will go back to that person and say, "I'm really sorry, I should have done this or I should have done that." But for us, it's a matter of, remember that you are not the final decision maker. You just need to look and feel good about, I did everything that I could do for this child, and I really gave that child a voice. And then nothing is left just for you. Each time you do it, each time you decompress, I think you get better and better. It gives you an opportunity to look at what you've done positively, what you've done, I could have done a little bit better. And now I'm going to turn it over to my cohort, Chris, and he's going to start going through some of the pros and cons of advocacy. You want me to flip for you?
Yeah, please. Hi, everybody. We'll kind of shift a little bit, talk about some pros. And how many of you heard that you're going to be the voice? You know, before you even went to Janet's training, you saw that little snippet on there, we are the voice for the child. Well, I don't know about you, but boy, that just excited me. It really did, because my wife had become an advocate, wouldn't tell me a bloody thing because of the confidentiality. So I was doing my research, and you keep reading, we are the voice for the children, and that really appealed to me. And so y'all have all been at this a certain amount of time. Where do you want me?
You're good.
Certain amount of time. Do you feel you are the voice for that child? Now, you heard Sharon talk about it in the court, etc. And unfortunately, there's been times in the court that I didn't feel like I was the voice for the child as much as I'd like to be. But for those of you that know me, I'm not very bashful. And just like you, I've been told it's not your time, or we don't, not going to go into that level of detail. So, but anyway, that is certainly one of the biggest pros as far as I'm concerned. Best interest of the child. That's obviously our charter, to work in the best interest of the child. Now again, Sharon talked about the attorneys. The attorneys have to work for the client, just like she said. And bless the attorney's heart, they may say, okay, little Jane, what do you want? Well, I want to go back to mother, even though she's a drug addict and spends half her time in jail. Well, that's what the attorney has to work for, because that is his client or her client. We work in the best interest of the child. And what I like about that is we can evaluate the case and what all is going on, and what is in the best interest of the child may not be particularly what the child wants, but that's what our charter is going to be. And sometimes a judge may go different, but that's what we are up against occasionally. So we have to work in the best interest of the child, and that is so important for you to know everything about the case, all the circumstances, all the families, just like Sharon was talking about, documentation, etc. Because how are you going to know what's in the best interest of the child if you don't know that family member that child looks like it's headed towards? So you've got to do your due diligence throughout the case in order to work for the best interest of that child.
The other thing too, I don't mean to interrupt you.
That's all right.
There are statutory requirements for the best interest of the child, and those are in the statutes, and that's the evidence I'm talking about. When you're doing your reports, when you're testifying before the court, you need to know what those factors are, and make sure that that information is before the judge, because when the judge makes the best interest decision, which is what they need to do, they're going to go right down through that statute and say, okay, the parents abandoned them, did the parents provide financially for them, did the parents abuse, did they neglect? There's a whole series of statutory requirements that have to be met.
I've seen one judge do that. So.
Yeah.
Okay, you obviously know what CASA stands for, and you know you're court appointed. And I'm sure you all keep your court appointment very, very handy, because you have to register at schools, at hospitals, RTCs, whatever the case. So you've got to keep that handy. First time you go into a placement, you've got to have that with you, as well as your badge. I've had placements actually ask for that. So please keep your court appointment handy. Now, what does that court appointment mean? Well, I know you know this, but we are just that. We're court appointed, and we have, even though we're volunteers, we have the right to go into that school, that hospital, whatever the case is, into family members. I've had placements say, well, you know, I don't have to see you. I'm sorry, ma'am. Yes, you do. So you really got to, and I'm not talking about abuse your court appointment by any means, but we certainly want to know what that court appointment is for and how to use it. And that's very, very important. Now, she's been talking about the attorneys, and that court appointment certainly gives you the right to go in and interact and communicate with those attorneys up to the point that they can talk to you and share information. And there, obviously, there's a line there that is drawn and they won't. But staying in touch with the attorneys is very, very important. So use your court appointment, use it properly. Now, let me stop a minute. I want you to ask questions. I like interactivity, okay? So if you want to say something, stop me. I'll be happy to talk to you about that. Okay, support system. Well, there they sit over here. You know, as you know, we have a wonderful organization now. We have staff supervisors.
Now.
Well, excuse me, okay. I promised Janet I was going to be very positive during my presentation. I've been at this 7.5 years and associated with the organization. I've been on the board twice, etc. And let me just say that the organization is wonderful now. It has been for several years, but it has not always been that way, unfortunately. So, anything else? But seriously, and I've gone through multiple CASA supervisors, and we couldn't have better ones than we do now. Our executive director, I mean, you all know, you interact with them. So a support system that is just marvelous in my opinion. And coupled with that are resources available. Janet has just all types of resources. The ladies over here have resources. Use them. Some of the books I've checked out here are some of the most interesting books that I've read. And being an advocate, you can relate to what the book is conveying so well, and you get some credit for it, obviously, training credit. So
I just read two.
Yeah.
I read Renting Lacey, and I just finished up Carrying the Bricks.
Who's
Yeah.
got Renting Lacey?
I
You,
got
I
it
was
on
gonna say,
I
Diane,
just
you
brought
got
it back.
So you,
It's here
okay.
now.
All right, I want Renting Lacey. I'm trying to get it.
I got it on Kindle, if you're interested. It was really reasonable, so I did it on Kindle. But very, very good books. One's on trafficking, the other on the life in a foster home for a young man, and it's really impactful.
Okay, and I'm going to get into this a little bit more, but how many have gone to the DFPS website and looked around? Okay, then I won't say anything about that, but please, and you're going to get a little bit of it here in just a minute, there's a lot of good information there, things you can print out, answers to questions that I've had about various things when we go through our cases. So I encourage you, go to the DFPS website and look around. There really is some good information there, okay? So use that. Remember we're talking about pros now, the good things. Outcome. Now, I don't know how many cases I've had, it doesn't matter, but I've only had one case where the outcome, and that was only for 2 of the 3 children, that the outcome was against what I recommended. And that's going to happen, probably happened to some of you, okay? So, but when the outcome is what you want, etc., you have to decide what you're going to do with your relationship with that child. And how many of you have had a case closed in the last year? And where are you with those child or children?
I still see them every week.
And so,
We still get updates. The adopted parents now, text us, give us updates.
and I've got kids that, you know, they have no contact. I've tried and get nothing, etc. And I think y'all know that I had a kid 7.5 years. I had a case 7.5 years. The one remaining child was adopted in April, and I wasn't able to go because of COVID, so it was all virtual, etc. Well, last Friday, I was able to go and see him and his family, etc. We talked to the family for weeks, and we agreed to go. All right. Now, again, that young man, and I want you to read that bottom quote. No problem. You have been through everything, so I am gonna be right by your side too. Now, that's from my little boy I had 7.5 years. And why did he say that? I don't know what switch went off, but after his adoption, and he got a phone, he's 13, almost 14, and he got a phone, and all of a sudden he's calling me, and he's texting me, and just everything is, and I went back to him and I said, what is going on? I mean, you know, why all of a sudden are you communicating with me? And I'll explain that in just a minute. And that was his quote from a text. Anyway, and that just warmed my heart, because all during that case, and the poor child was moved probably 13, 14 times, I could never get him to come out and tell me about the placement. And we had 2 foster homes where he was abused in addition to the original abuse, okay? And he would not tell me about that. I was having lunch with he and his brother at a school one day, and you know, just casual conversation. He said, "Oh yeah, we're staying with so-and-so." What do you mean? Well, we're staying over at their house. Anyway, checked into it. The caregiver had been arrested, did an emergency removal that night. So it's so important, and I did an exit interview with Rachel, and it was, you know, what is your goal heretofore? How do I, as a volunteer and a non-professional at this, how do I get these children to open up so we can be their voice and protect them? And that was really disappointing to me that after so long I couldn't get that done with him. But in the end, he's adopted, his brother's adopted, and it's just turned out wonderful. And boy, I'll tell you what, I wouldn't have ever thought it turned out wonderful.